we want to give a few minutes still, or we want to go ahead and get started?
You want to give 1 more minute?
Yeah, let's just give a couple more minutes for people to log in, get audio connected. Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and obviously people can continue to join as we go. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second session of the 2022 Lincoln University Cooperative Extension Small Farm Conference. My name is Dr. Tatiana Fisher, and I am the State Poultry Extension Specialist at Lincoln University. I work with small poultry farmers throughout the state of Missouri, and sometimes beyond, but my focus is within the state. I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Romero Salinas, who is the State Small Ruminant Specialist, and I will let him speak about himself for a moment. Dr. Salinas.
Thank you, Dr. Tatiana. My name is Dr. Romero Salinas, Extension State Specialist, working with the small ruminants here in Missouri. And I am so happy to be participating here with our invited speaker, Kat. So thank you, Tatiana.
So we are joined by Miss Kat Brookshire, who owns Brookshire Hills Farm in Olean, Missouri. Is that correct, Kat?
Olean.
Olean. See, you gotta learn about how you pronounce these little towns. Perfect. Olean, Missouri, which is outside of Eldon, correct?
Yes.
Roughly. Kat has joined us today to share her experiences with raising chickens, goats, and some other livestock species on her small farm, and talking to us about how she makes money with them and some of the challenges that she's experienced, that hopefully her experiences can help you moving forward. After Kat's presentation, we will have a question and answer session with Kat, myself, and Dr. Salinas. If there are questions that you have as participants during Kat's presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat. Everyone is muted, and we will keep all the persons muted while she's speaking. But if there's a question that's relevant to what she's talking about and you drop it in the chat, myself or Dr. Salinas will jump in to ask that question while she is presenting. The expectation is for her presentation to last about an hour, and for about half an hour after dedicated to questions either for her or for myself or Dr. Salinas. And we're looking forward to hearing all the questions that people have. So Kat, I'll go ahead and let you share your screen and get started.
Thank you, Tatiana, and thank you, Dr. Romero. I am really excited to be here. And let me share my screen real quick. All right, Can you see that okay, Tatiana?
Yes.
All right. So, I started Brookshire Hills Farm. It's a little over 5 years ago now. So I've not been at this really long. So I have a few things that I can talk about from getting started and all the learning. So I'll be talking about my farm practices and keeping primarily goats and chickens together. What I want to point out is my title slide here has sheep in it, and we'll talk about sheep as well a little bit. See if I can get it to go to the next slide. There we go. So my background, I didn't grow up on a farm. I had a small flock of poultry growing up. My mom primarily raised chickens, had some guineas for a while, had a few ducks here or there. But my passion has always been agriculture, raising animals. I'm also very much into conservation, like wildlife conservation and nature. And I have a passion for learning, which proved to be a very important thing when it came to goats. By training, I'm a geological engineer, worked in environmental for a good while. All of the ag practices that I'm going to be talking about are self-taught via books, primarily. Raising dairy goats, Story's Guide to Raising Dairy Goats is worth its weight in gold, in my opinion. I completely read through that thing before starting with goats, and I think I've read almost all of the parts 2 or 3 times. Some of them I had to reference every few months. It also has some really good recipes and that kind of thing too. I also have gone to several seminars and learned some things from other local goat and chicken farmers on Facebook. And it's been a lot of trial and error. And I'm going to describe a lot of that today as well. And I will be talking about my spouse has a lot of the same goals that I do. And that's a really important aspect of our farm as well, because it's not just me working with our goats and chickens. And our inspiration was wanting our food to be responsible, know what was in our food. I'm also intolerant to cow dairy, so it was pretty obvious that it was going to be goats, but goats fit our lifestyle and our practices better than cattle or other species in that way. Also, there is nothing like fresh eggs off of a farm. I don't even bother with grocery store eggs. So there's my background, and that's what got us started. I am currently raising goats and chickens primarily, and we have, at one point in time, I called it a llama problem, but we have a llama as a guardian for our goats, and it also helps with generally keeping predators down for the chickens too. So the goats we raise, I have La Manchas, Nigerian dwarves, and then several dairy mixes. I have many Nubians, many La Manchas, and some others that I couldn't exactly tell you other than dairy mix. And some of those are my hardiest, and some of those are my best producing and tastiest milk as well. We can talk a little bit about that later. But the chickens I have, I love my Black Americanas. They're my favorite breed. They lay blue eggs, and they're a very friendly, curious chicken. I raise American breasts. That was new last year. And they are a very good meat bird, and they lay a lot of eggs too. And they don't have like an expiration date like some of the other meat birds like Cornish cross. Almost have to be butchered by about 20 weeks, if not before. The American breast will live a normal life, similar to one of the laying breeds. My husband's favorite that we still raise are the Millie Floors. They're fun and cute, and I have a bunch of pictures of them here in a little bit. We also raise Houdans because they're fun, Silkies and frizzled Silkies because they're fun, and people love frizzled Silkies. So I make quite a bit of money off of them. I love my olive eggers and Easter eggers, and I buy eggs, and my mom sends eggs because my mom raises a few breeds as well. So I hatch all kinds of birds, all kinds of chickens through the spring and some in the fall. And because of them, we have the llamas as well. So here are two very good representatives of the two main breeds I raised. The one on the left, his name was Bart, and we had him the first 3 years that we started our farm, and he is a La Mancha. Notice the almost flat ears, and he was a great, fun, really gentle animal that liked to climb on things, and so we built him something to climb on. And the other one on the right, his name was Snowman, and we had him from 2018 to 2020. And he was very cute and friendly and begged for treats. So this is his begging for treats face. All of my animals, I don't keep anything that's not friendly to other animals and people. I don't have time for an aggressive animal or anything that I can't interact with on a regular basis to verify with health and things. So those are my two main breeds. For chickens, we have Houdans on the left. The black ones on the bottom are my Black Americanas with the puffy cheeks. The white ones, the all white ones up top, are American breasts. And then the other white and black ones are the standard light Brahmas. They were not as economical, and I'm no longer raising them. I couldn't sell the chicks for as much as the other breeds, or eggs for that matter, as much as the other breeds. So I just this year stopped raising them. The bottom right, the little orange, white, and black guys, they are the Millefleur de Uckles. And I keep getting told by all of my clients that buy them that I have the prettiest, and I'm kind of partial. So those are the primary breeds I raise that are full bred. The Easter eggers and olive eggers are mixed breeds, and I didn't include them on this page. But I included some of their eggs here. So some of the obviously the dark olive green eggs you see are olive eggers, and some of the blues and lighter greens and the speckled light green one in the bottom are Easter egger eggs. That's really my farm. My farm goals for my chickens are to have hatching eggs and sell hatching eggs almost all year. Even in the dead of winter, if people want hatching eggs, I usually discount them because some of them will have gotten too cold to hatch. But year round, if people want hatching eggs, I have them. And I love the colors. I love like that bottom, both of the bottom pictures are I call them my loot for the day from one house. That's actually the one on the left is from two houses. But that's what I love. That's my I guess my goal and my inspiration. So not only do I have the hatching eggs, but I have chicks mostly in the spring, some early summer, and then again this time of year in the fall. And then by the end of September, October, I want to have sold out completely for the year. I will raise meat birds sometimes throughout the winter. It's more energy. It takes a lot more energy, and you put more food in them at some point when it's cold. So I'm set up for winter chicks. Not everyone is. My secondary goals are to have bug control for myself around my yard and our grounds, but also for the goats. I'll be talking about that more here in a little bit. And I've already mentioned the responsibly grown eggs and meat. And I also personally want to enjoy them. I want to be able to go out and gather eggs that make me happy. I want to be able to watch my chickens be happy outside as they free range, and I don't want them to eat all of my time and money. My goal is to have them make money for me, and my chickens have really done that. Especially these last 2 years. But it can become much more time consuming than I want it to. So that's where I have to really manage that. So this is a picture of the inside of my incubator with a variety of chicks hatching. I have lavender Americanas in there and Millies on the left and some breasts, black Americanas. This is what's most fun for me with my chickens, is opening the incubator and emptying it out and counting them and their little noises. So it's a lot of fun, and then I get to market them, which is also a lot of fun for me. My farm goals for my goats, I originally got them to have milk for me to use. That was goal number 1, is happy goats and milk for me. And I make cheese and yogurt and caramel, and I use it in my garden for fertilizer, and I make goat milk soap with it. And those were my original goals. One of the secondary goals and one of the byproducts of having a dairy farm is actually kids, like goat kids everywhere sometimes, it seems, and that's also a lot of fun. I specifically breed for having really good hardy dairy animals that are colorful. Any of them that are minis or Nigerians, I hope to be blue-eyed and very colorful. I can get more money if they are pretty. And I raise also specifically to have friendly animals, because nobody that's looking for starting a dairy or adding to their dairy wants a goat that they have to tame. So I make sure that any of mine are well socialized, and any of the bucklings cannot also be over socialized, but any of the doelings have at least seen a milking stand, gotten some treats on a milking stand by the time that they are ready to go. And all of mine, I try to raise for parasite resistance. So if we get animals that consistently have a parasite issue, it's usually a management problem. If we can't get it under control or don't understand what's the problem, we either cull or sell off those animals, because I don't want to breed that. So for my soap, that's another cool, fun, artsy way for me to make money from my goats. And I sell a lot of soap at Christmas time, and then several times throughout the year, I'll have bigger pushes for marketing. But I sell different colors and scents, and I have a face soap and a hand and body soap recipe that I sell year round. So our pasture management is a big deal. It started out as, hey, another cool thing about goats is that they like prevent you from having to mow all the time. So it became more of a management and rotational grazing for specific plants and for pasture management. I also don't have to put as much hydrocarbons into managing my property because I have the goats. But all of those things, I also have to keep enjoying my goats. I can't have them eat all of my time. They cannot eat all of my money. And unlike chickens, goats are way better at eating money and not being as economical unless they're managed very well and marketed well. So here are some cool pictures of some of my goat goals. I can't eat cow dairy of any kind, including cheese. So I make a lot of cheese. I make a lot of yogurt. So those things are also preventing me from buying cheese and yogurt and all kinds of other things at the store. But this is the cheese process on the right, and a dish using ricotta and some goat cheese mozzarella on the left. Also, most of the vegetables in there I grew myself as well, just a little plug. So here is some of my soap. The picture on the left was taken before Christmas last year, so I sold almost all of this soap at Christmas time, and then I had another rack very similar to it that I sold all of before Christmas. And this one on the right was one of my last 2 batches here that I made this summer. In 2019, I took 2nd place in the American Dairy Goat Association's goat milk soap competition with my hand and body recipe. I had to send it in to their conference in Idaho to be a part of that. And that was a really big long shot because I was competing against people that make their money, like their career on goats and goat milk soap. So that was a big deal because we had just started 2 years prior. And I made my own recipe using a soap calculator for very specific things I was looking for. Anyway, they liked it too. So marketing all these things is a real challenge. I primarily market within the community. I have a lot of return customers for chicks and eggs and soap, and they almost always send their friends my way. That's a big part of it. I use Facebook primarily for my soap, but I also sell chickens, chicks, and hatching eggs through different Facebook groups. I recently started with Instagram. It's not been very helpful, but my big push at the end of the season in the spring, summer, and the end of season in the fall is Jacob's Cave swap. Anything that I don't want to winter or I don't want to summer, I sell there. I haven't had a lot of luck with my soap there. It's just too much for me to manage, like keeping all of the chickens, having food and water and watching my soap and talking about soap and all of them. So I don't sell soap very much at Jacob's Cave. The last 2 Jacob's Caves, we sold out completely of all of our poultry on Saturday. So we didn't have to go back on Sunday. And that's my goal, because by Sunday, I just want to clean up from all of it. And anything I take to a swap meet like that, I plan on selling there. Even if I have to like discount on the last day, I don't plan on bringing it back. And I haven't had much of a problem, other than I do discount roosters pretty good on Saturday, because I don't want to bring them back. So this is kind of my setup. I make sure when I take them to places like that, that I keep them off of the ground, because that's how they can get sick. This shows how I keep the tarp and the wood chips, and this is on a Saturday, so the wood chips have kind of sprawled out all over. But I get comments on how healthy my birds look and happy my birds look at the swap meets, and I don't want to know what other people bring or do to their birds on out there, but it's nice to hear all day compliments like that. So that goes into my chicken practices. I always make sure my houses and runs are clean and mud free. When we do begin to have a mud problem, I spread rock or wood chips or hay or old hay and straw, even that like the goats wouldn't eat but didn't trample very much, can go in my chicken houses. I use diatomaceous earth, especially outside, to make sure that they have places to dust. I'll use ashes. I use a lot of different traps and things to keep the rodents down, because it's a big part of their health too. And you can't really see it on this picture to the right, but I make sure that my runs and my houses are as close to predator proof as possible. I have skirting across the bottom of all of the runs for about 18 inches at the bottom, so things can't dig in. And having llamas on site also helps with predators, but we have had a possum get in a couple of our houses, and we've had a little bit of a raccoon problem around our chicken houses where the llamas can't get to. I separate my houses. So this picture is from late December last year, I believe. So this doesn't show how I separate them, but it shows how I condense them in the off season, so I don't have to keep thawed water in 6 places, but only 3 or 4, which is a big deal. So I run 6 houses through the rest of the season and 3 or 4 in the winter. Obviously separated to keep breeds true. And I use layer pellets from NutraAg, and I order those in bulk. I order those typically in 1 to 2 tons at a time. And then through the growing season for my chicks, I use Do More Chick Starter. And I always have oyster shell and sand out in my adult houses, and I provide the 2 to 6 week old chicks with sand for grit as well. I already talked about like easy waterers. I don't want to water in 17 places. I don't want to have to keep water thawed in 10 places through the winter. I want to make that as easy as I can. And as I graduate the chicks, they start out, when they come out of the incubator, they go into a box with small waterers and then into a wooden brooder with a larger waterer. Usually I have sold them by the time they make it out of the wooden brooder, but the ones that I want to keep as my grow outs go into a wire brooder because it's easier to clean and easier to give water. And then you can see one of the adult pens here. Another thing I want to note, my goats never enter this chicken run or the chicken house. They cannot eat the chicken feed, and I don't want them in the condensed bird areas like you see here. However, 1 or sometimes 2 throughout the off season, but usually 1 of my houses free ranges every day, and they have access to, sorry, you're probably going to hear my dog. Someone just knocked on my door and they're going to have to deal with it. Anyway, so they have access to both, or at least 2 of my upper pastures for my goats and my barn lot during the day when they're free ranging. And that helps keep down parasites for my goats. And it helps, chickens are meant to eat grass. That's part of the diet that they're really supposed to have. And it helps make the eggs more rich and just generally healthy. So here's another one of my houses. Again, this is in the winter, and these are the Brahmas that I will no longer be raising after this year. The Brahmas, I just couldn't compete with. There are a lot of other hatcheries that raise Brahmas for super cheap, and I raise chickens that are more specialty breeds. I can make more money off of them. So some of the issues I've had.
Real quick before you move on, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question about why you use diatomaceous earth and what it's for.
So diatomaceous earth helps keep external parasites down. Bugs can't crawl through it very well because it like rips up their exoskeleton, and then they die and they can't reproduce as quickly. Also, chickens know that they like to take dust baths to put that dust up in their feathers, because any dust will deter mites and lice, especially lice. They that's a natural instinct for them. So the diatomaceous earth provides them with the dust and mite and lice prevention without being a chemical like permethrin or something like that. Diatomaceous earth is also food. I buy the food grade version. And so if they end up eating it, it's okay. I try to not like dust everything with it because it can be an inhalation hazard. But it's nice to add to their dusting spots and below when I put out chips and stuff, wood chips or straw. So did that answer your question, Tatiana?
I think that answered the.
Okay. So issues I've had infertile roosters a couple times. One of them, I just really liked this particular rooster and kept him for too long and relied on him being fertile, and I got 0 fertile eggs. He was just too old. And other things can happen with the roosters. I have learned that I have to, every 2 years, replace, or if I can, in a couple instances, I keep an older rooster that's 2 or 3 and a younger rooster. And if you raise the younger roosters with them, oftentimes they won't fight, but I will not tolerate it if they start fighting and don't stop pretty quickly. So that's been an issue. That was an issue with my Americanas and with my Brahmas. I also have had some issues on how to take orders ahead of time. Like, how many orders do I take before, like, I can't count my chicks before they hatch. That's a problem. And then predicting what's going to be popular in 3 weeks, because there's a 3-week incubation, is actually harder than I expected, because it seems like olive eggers are really popular early in the spring, and then nobody wants olive eggers. That's been the last 2 years. So how do I manage that has been an issue, and it's just a day by day sometimes. And I'm even back ordered right now on my breast eggs, and I have no chicks available to take to Jacob's Cave like I like to. Also, egg organization. The reason I included this picture was not, it's a good picture of me, it's look at this pile of eggs in these cartons behind me. This is actually organized on a medium day, not a great day, but it can get out of hand. I label all of my eggs by date, and I separate them by breed. It's convenient that my breed separation is also by color, except my husband is colorblind. So anytime I'm gone, we have to do it a little differently. So egg organization is a big issue. Record keeping on chicken health, record keeping on feed, record keeping on what eggs are selling, what time of year, what chicks are selling, and then record keeping on sales. All of it is time consuming. That's one of the issues, and an organization nightmare sometimes. But it's really nice to have a lot of that information, so I know how to approach next year, or all of that. So that's been that is an ever-changing, sometimes nightmare. And then going back through when I want answers on how early did millefleur eggs sell last year. So it's going back and or when did I separate last year because I want to do this better. All kinds of stuff like that. And then not this year, but the year before, I hatched way too many chicks way too late. And I ended up actually taking a bunch to the auction, which was nice, but that's not where you make really any money on chicks. So what do you do to prevent excess chicks? What do you do with excess chicks once you've hatched them and there's not a good outlet immediately? My answer is just take them to the auction. Has been, and this year I planned better to not have so many late in the spring and early summer after Jacob's Cave, just the ones I intended on keeping. And I was really close to that this year, way better than last year. Also, during the busy season, at one point in time, I had 17 places to check food and water every day. That's not ideal. There are two of us, it's me and my husband, but for the most part, we've both had jobs. Me, the last couple years has been back and forth between part-time and not, and full-time. And so 17 places is still too many, even if that's your primary job. So that's one thing with management, with keeping breeds separated, ages separated. It can be very time consuming. My goat practices. I thought about separating this into several different slides, but I thought it would be better just to leave it all here in one. It really comes down to pastures. Rotational grazing, knowing when to not rotational overgraze, which is what I was doing for probably 2 to 3 years. I recently went from 4 primary pastures. I'm trying to get it up to splitting them into 8 so I can leave them on for shorter periods of time and rotate them. So there's a 40-day wait period for each pasture. That's ideal. Seeding of my pastures, I've used a couple native grasses and forbs. So goats are not natural grazers, they're natural foragers. So they have to have more than just grass. They don't thrive on fescue. They don't thrive on a monoculture of anything. They are meant to eat all kinds of things. So you want the forbs, you want the legumes. If you can rotate a little bit of brushy, shrubby, like woody things in there, that's the best. You'll find that if you overgraze that, you can do that once or twice and then it's done. But that's been a big learning curve, is pastures. And with pastures comes fence, because lo and behold, they don't actually like to stay in a fence. We have found the best is to use field fence. Don't use welded wire. It might look like a good idea. It might be suggested somewhere, but if they start leaning on it, it collapses. Just spend the extra money. Field fence. We have a few places you'll see in some of my latter slides that we still use cattle panel because we can move them. But other than that, it's field fence. And we recently bought electric netting, and we're going to try that to see if we can get the whole like 8 to 10 different pastures here, different for rotational grazing. So cattle people will tell you that goats will eat any kind of hay. They won't. That is a lie. And it's not necessarily good for them. Again, goats are meant to forage. They're not meant to eat a monoculture grass. So you don't want to buy straight fescue. You don't want to buy straight, like one thing, like one kind of anything. I like to buy mixed grass. It's also called prairie grass or prairie hay. Locally, that's what people call it. Sometimes if I can get some hay that has some blackberry briars in it, I like to especially use that when I have goats in my barn, because goat kids like to play with them. They'll chew on them. They like them a lot. Make sure you don't ever feed anything, like make sure it's clean, make sure it doesn't have any mold, it's not like completely falling apart, and that kind of thing. Like that's like utmost importance. You can, if you get something that molds, you can use it for erosion control, you can use it for almost nothing. But you don't even want to use that for bedding, for that matter. My favorite is Lespedeza hay, and a Lespedeza mix specifically, but alfalfa, brome, orchard grass mixes. There have been 2 occasions that all I could find that wasn't fescue was brome, and even though it was a monoculture, they did fine on that. I will buy alfalfa bales specifically to give some of my mamas shortly after they give birth, and if I'm worried about keeping weight on them as they are going through their milking curve. So it's about hay. Feed, I try to feed as little as possible to keep costs down and to keep my goats in the right body condition. As long as my pastures are doing good, I usually only have to feed on the milk stand, and then in the winter, every few days, especially when it's really cold, I will feed. If I get anything that's any of my goats that are looking kind of thin, I will pull them up and feed them and try to figure out what the issue is. Sometimes my type B personality goats don't compete very well for feed in the winter, and so I will get some thin ones then, and they just have to be fed separately because they don't want to compete. I also get rid of those if it's a problem because they're not thriving in my situation. And in the winter, I mix a little bit of corn with the dairy goat pellets because most of mine in the winter are not actively milking or actively raising babies. And corn will help keep them warm from the inside out. The rumen will produce more heat with corn than with the other pellets.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, Dr.
Yeah,
Smith.
it's very, very good information you are giving. So I just, some people was asking about in some other day, when to start grazing in the spring. I mean, when you have your animals during the winter, probably in a barn or without the grazing, and the grass start growing in the spring. So when you should start grazing your pasture in the spring is the first question.
So ideally, you wouldn't have your goats on any one pasture for more than like a couple weeks without rotating them off of it so they don't trample it to bits. So I rotational graze. I try year round. Winter is particularly difficult. I do have the large hay bunks you'll see, and if I haven't already shown the picture, you'll see one. I think I've already shown it. You'll see a picture with a large hay bunk. Nope, it's coming up. And so I have, in all of my main pastures, I have large hay bunks. So I have 4 areas in the winter that I rotate them through. So I keep rotating them, or you will get, the trampling. And anytime like you get a big snow event or rain event, here we go. So this big hay bale rack I have in 4 pastures, so I can rotate them, and they still have, they prefer hay in the winter anyway. Obviously there's nothing green, so I rotate them. They do tend to spend more time in this pasture that's closer to the house when the weather is bad. So then I try in the early spring to let it just grow a little bit more than the others, and it seemed to work really well for the last couple of years.
Okay, and what about the breeding season? Do you try to match the breeding and the kidding season with the best pasture nutrition that you will produce in?
So my goals are to have kids almost year round,
Okay.
because I want dairy. I want my milk year round. So my biggest push is having kids in March or April because they're the most economical. They're ready when people are wanting them. And that is when the pastures are really beginning to thrive. As far as breeding, there are lots of different ways to separate goats for breeding. But early in the fall, mid-fall, late summer even, I will take particular does and put them with particular bucks in. We have some very small pens up by the barn, and I try not to take a doe and put in a buck's already area. They're both in a new area, so I don't have any trouble with that. And then toward the end of the fall, I pull any does that are too young or I don't want bred for whatever reason. I pull them up and put them up there and put my cover buck, which is usually my Nigerian, down with all of the does to make sure that I have a cover buck there.
Okay, well, good. So your goal is to have milk during all the year.
All year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
I typically will have 2 or 3 kids in the fall, and then those does I milk throughout the entire winter. And then I have choices on which does if I don't want to milk. Sometimes if I leave twins or even triplets on a doe, I won't consume the milk until after I've weaned. There are other does that I just prefer them to, like, I prefer them to not me take the milk until after weaning. And other does I'll leave a doeling on them and then take whatever milk I need once or twice a day after 12 weeks.
Yeah.
That's doe dependent.
Yeah, there is a question from Margaret Chamas that says white corn that reduces pH and causes the opposite problem. Do you know?
I don't know. I've always heard corn for warm. That was I've heard it in several different places. And as far as the corn, I just buy bagged, chopped or crushed corn, and I mix about a quarter corn with my dairy goat pellets just in the winter when it's cold.
Yeah, in fact, Dr. Ken Coffey from Arkansas University, he recommends corn because he says that mainly what they need is energy more than protein, so that the energy that is given the corn is very good, and the protein is enough for most of the small ruminants. The concern is when the dairy goats are milking and it's in the beginning of their lactation, so probably they will need more protein also.
Yeah. And those does don't get corn, the ones that are in the milk.
Okay, thank you, Kat.
So with goats, they are small enough to be an animal that predators want to go after. So almost everybody has some kind of management plan for predators. Some people put their goats up at night and close them in the barn. I don't have that opportunity with my pasture rotation system. I use llamas. Right now I have one llama, and she does her job beautifully. She eats the same food, and she likes a little extra food when it's cold, just like they do. She likes the hay, and they're a natural forager, just like the goats. So that's what I use. As far as mineral, I use both loose mineral and blocks. I use mineral blocks in my pastures, and then loose mineral anytime I have new mamas, or for specifically the ones that I am keeping in milk, because the loose mineral is more concentrated and they need more of it. And it's also easier to keep in the barn situation than blocks are, and it's easier to keep blocks in the pasture situation for me. I do use copper boluses, which are additional copper, basically this big pill that you shove down their throats. And I use that every 3 to 6 months, every 3 months only for the ones that I am keeping in milk or have babies on them, because dairying makes them go through more mineral of all kinds. I keep a galvanized pipe in their water in all of the pastures and around the barn, because that helps with zinc deficiency. I learned that through a llama group, and I have found that it helps, especially on my dairying does. I give selenium vitamin E about 6 weeks before any of them kid, and then I give that intermittently through them producing milk. And if the deficiency on that is if their hooves start to grow really fast and soft and they'll almost like grow outward, that is the major sign of selenium deficiency. So any goats that are like that, I give every couple weeks until it resolves itself. I don't just deworm. Like, I don't deworm on a schedule. I do typically run fecal counts on a schedule. I do that approximately quarterly for about a third of my herd, and it's either random or I know my goats. So a third of your goats will carry 80 or 90% of the worms. And if you get to know your goats, you know which ones are likely to have the problem. So I do fecal counts for everybody approximately quarterly. And then anytime I have an issue, like somebody's not healthy, I run a fecal count. And I use different dewormers, depending on the goat. You can use different dewormers for goats in milk, different dewormers for goats that are pregnant, different dewormers for different worms that you'll find. And then all of my pastures have a 3-sided shelter. One of them is just a trailer that we move between 2 pastures, and it's just a kind of a 3-sided shelter. Those pastures, when the weather gets really bad, I do rotate them off to a better shelter. And that's perfectly fine, even in the cold, even in the snow, except for brand new babies or weak goats that when it is bad weather, I will pull them up and put them into the barn. But it's usually not very many unless I have a lot of babies, which can happen. You always want to be prepared for emergencies. My vet kit and my birthing kit are actually 2 separate kits, but I rely on those and I keep those as organized and as stocked as I possibly can, because you never know what's going to happen with a birthing or what goat will do something dumb and try to die today. And it's a Sunday, so you can't really, actually get a vet, but not very many vets. And by the way, I meant if something happens, it's always when you can't find a vet, but you have to plan early because most vets will not see or even talk goats. So you have to be prepared for that.
So here a question. I have heard that there are not many vets that see small ruminants, specifically goats. So what do you recommend other farmers to be prepared with a vet?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
Yeah, how the farmer can find a veterinary that handle goats?
That is tough. That's really tough. I was very fortunate. I have 3 different vets I go to depending on the day it happens or what issue I'm dealing with. Quail Valley Vet, if I tell them exactly what's wrong, or it's a really quick, simple dress an injury, they can do it. But I called around, like, that's what you have to do. Like, look at your local vet list, call around. Your local extension office may have advice for you. It's hard. And sometimes they're just going to tell you, oh, the only vet that actually looks at goats is MU in Columbia, which is false, by the way. You can find them. MU may be the closest one to you. And it might be the only one that does surgeries or whatnot on goats, but just call around.
Okay, there is another question. When you are seeding for your forages for your pasture, what are you reseeding every year, every 2 years? How do you reseed forbs or legumes on your pasture? How do you manage your native grasses?
So, pasture management is so big. I over ordered seed Then I used it for 2 different times, but it was every other year. I did go through the second year and overseed with a few additional ones, but my original seed mix that I ordered, and mind you, we were trying to get the fescue out. We had primarily fescue, and so we intentionally overgrazed some, and that was good and bad back in 2018 and 2019. But I ordered Indian grass, Gama grass, Illinois bundle flower, 2 different kinds of clover. There were 3 others, and off the top of my head, I cannot come up with them, but there were 8 different mixes. And then separately, I ordered bird's foot trefoil, which is actually not native, but it also doesn't take over. And I ordered dandelion, and I ordered chicory, and I spread those separately my off year. The chicory actually has done really well, and it's really, really good for goats. One that I want to note that I did not seed with was Serratia lespedeza. I buy lespedeza hay because it's really good for my goats. It has a lot of tannins, but if you get that started, it's really bad for the native quail and a lot of other natives. I don't seed with it. My goats, I feel like, can keep it down just in the hay, and it's a pretty low risk, but I do not seed with lespedeza. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so if my, there we go. So this is a picture of one of my pastures shortly after I rotated my goats off of it. You'll see that we've got goats over here in that pasture over there. This was also just a really nice sunrise picture. But you can see the water is actually over here. So they trampled this area. And then what started to grow back was the some of the clover and some of the other stuff. And when it started to grow back, it almost always something blooms right after I get my goats off of a pasture. And that's, like I said, pastures are so important. And you can see up here that I have my chickens over there, and they have access to both of these pastures. Here are some really good pictures of the pasture. I had just rotated them back onto this pasture. So this pasture and this pasture are actually the same pasture. These are 2 years apart. And I had a really bad problem when I first moved here with this buttercup. Buttercup is not really good for goats. But it likes a lot of water and it will really take over. So I had to get that out so I could actually use these pastures better, and the goats would actually eat it, because the buttercup is not poisonous, but it will give them a bellyache. So though this is a beautiful picture with a really cute little goat and these beautiful flowers, it's not good for them. So you have to know what plants aren't good for your goats. Like, even if they're not poisonous, what's going to give them a bellyache? And so you can still see, and this is the same pasture. 2 years later, there are still a few, but there's a whole bunch of other plant species. The more plant species, the better off your goats, and really the better off any wildlife too will be. I've talked about the big hay feeders in all 4 of my pastures. At the barn, baby goats love sleeping in hay feeders. That's a thing. They just do. They love it, and it's not really good. So you have to pull out the hay from the bottom. But you waste the least hay by using a hay feeder like this red one or this blue one. And this is also a picture. I had quads here once, and all 4 made it, because I sold 2 after the colostrum. After they got colostrum, I sold them as bottle babies. Here's a really good picture of the minerals. So this is my primary mineral block that I get. And then Over here, I hope you guys can see it on yours, but I have this mineral feeder over here that's where I put my loose minerals. It's just got a cap on the top. It's a PVC pipe. And then I have a feeder across the wall in my stalls. It doesn't keep goat kids from chewing on their mother or whatever else they want to chew on. But that's how I manage my mineral. I've used donkeys as guardians when I had sheep. They can be aggressive with goats, and so I didn't keep the donkeys very long. They also tend to protect, like not, so llamas will get their herd into a safe spot, a corner, the building, wherever, and then protect from there, where donkeys will actively seek and destroy like coyotes or dogs or whatever it is. And it wasn't as good for our setup because we have shelters everywhere. But donkeys tend to be better for sheep, and the donkeys went with the sheep when I sold off the sheep. The llamas are super curious about everything, and even up in your camera if you let them. So this is my primary winter shelter. If I know the weather is going to turn bad, this is where they end up. And they do have a hay feeder back in the shelter that we use as well. And they have everything they need is actually in the shelter, but sometimes they just want to come out because they think the hay's better outside. And then on the right, we had our llamas in the barn for a little while too, when they had their own babies, and they still wanted to watch the goat babies and make sure they were happy. And goat kids like hay feeders to play in. So special protocols, I've already talked about the kids being more susceptible to cold. I will sometimes put jackets on them. I couldn't find any good kids in jackets pictures to put in here, but they're also very susceptible to coccidia. I keep everything clean as best I can, especially the waters, especially where the kids like to hang out, because they'll nibble on anything and everything, whether it's mud covered or not. Sunlight kills coccidia, and so mud outside is less dangerous as mud inside. And I ensure the proper nutrition and make sure that nobody's getting bullied. Kids get bullied all the time. Human kids, goat kids, it's just a problem. My bucks get pinned separately, but not alone. That's part of the reason I have two, and I make sure they get along. My two bucks love each other. They will like cuddle. It's really cute. But they can't be alone because they can die of loneliness. And I make sure that the feed that I give them in the winter time has ammonium chloride in it to prevent urinary calculi. I want to make sure my dairy does keep weight on. It doesn't seem to be a problem as long as I'm milking twice a day, because they're milking or they're eating twice a day. But if I'm not milking twice a day and they have kids on them, that's when I tend to have thinner does. Just keep everything clean. That's a big thing even on the farm. And I've already talked about minerals. Squash. I grow an entire squash garden to have squash throughout the winter and hopefully throughout the next summer, to give to them when they begin to get thin or when they just need a little extra. I cut up squash and give to them.
How do you review the nutrition of your dogs, especially when they are milking? I mean, do you make any test of your forages, of your, the protein, the fiber, and do you make any balancing ration for them, or just like a trying different diets? What do you do?
I played with a lot early on in the game. I tried a lot of different grains, a lot of different feeds, and I monitored by how long they would keep the right weight. Like it was all, I let their body language and their body score tell me what to do. And I could not find a bagged feed that I liked. But Nutra-Ag's Dairy Goat Blend, and I I did make sure it had some additional minerals, and it did have some copper, which has been historically an issue for me on my farm. But I monitored completely by how my goats kept their condition and their body language. Their body language and their attitude can also tell me a lot. And I'm working with them every day, most of the time, twice a day, because they're dairy animals. So I let them tell me. I have a couple right now that are straight fat on basically just my pastures. And I am not real sure how to deal with that part of it, but that's how I picked the food that I give, is how my goats stayed in good condition.
What is the production of milk of your goats?
It varies doe by doe, and the curve starts out less until they, their babies are at least 3 weeks old. And then the curve keeps rising by demand. So if I want, I have some of my La Manchas will give me 1.5 gallons at a time. I don't take that much because it's an extreme draw on them. I don't take more than 1 gallon at a time, maximum 2 gallons a day. And I only have a couple does that are actually capable of that. Most of them, it's about 3 quarts. And my Nigerians, if I ever got 3 quarts off of a Nigerian, I would say this is not a Nigerian. They lied to me, but my Nigerians, if I get more than 1 quart off at a time, they're doing well.
Okay. Are you going to be talking about cheese and yogurt and all that stuff later on?
So as much as I had planned on talking about cheese, I did when I mentioned like the things that I do. But we can at the end, if you guys have questions, I can talk about any of that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
So yep, that was the end for that one. So issues with my goats. I've talked about pastures a lot, pasture maintenance and management really helps with most of these things. But loss of goat kids and even adult goats in my first couple years was parasites. Because I didn't have the management techniques for my pastures, and I didn't know what to look for early. And I started culling according to ones that just couldn't get over parasites. I also introduced sheep at that same time, which increased my parasite load because sheep can carry parasites without showing that they have a problem. So they can make all the goats sick. And sheep also, it's a nightmare to try to keep sheep and goats together because sheep cannot have copper. Goats need a little bit of copper, especially if they're milking. And dairy goats more so than meat goats. But sheep can't have it. It will kill them. Straight up, dead sheep. I didn't ever kill off any sheep with copper because I was warned heavily and did my research. But it was hard to keep the goats with what they needed when I kept sheep and goats together. And then also the sheep carried a bunch of parasites that my goats couldn't tolerate. So between keeping sheep and having not the ideal pasture rotation system, my first year was kind of rough with the parasite load. I check eyelids on I try to check eyelids on all of my goats about once a week. Not all of them by any means at one time. And I know like if I haven't checked that one that doesn't like people as much, gets checked the least because the ones that come up to me, I'm like, hey, let me look at your eyelid. And they learn that also sometimes comes with treats, so they don't mind. And I run a lot of fecals, and that's what keeps the parasites under control. And also the coccidia I will see sometimes in fecals. And I use Marquee when I have a coccidia issue. Coccidia is mostly in kids, less in adults. Adults will always carry a little bit of coccidia, but coccidia can bloom and become a secondary issue if they have additional parasite load as an adult. So learning with the pasture plants, keeping what I need in my pastures was a learning curve. Education, more research. I've actually, you can't hardly find information on what forbs and legumes, and especially native. Like once you're like, I really want native, they're like, oh, we only know about Lespedeza. So just education and reading and all of that has been a lot. And pulling things like the buttercups and perilla mint, which is deadly to sheep and goats. I had throughout one of my pastures really bad and around my barn. And then overplanting with what is good. And it's just constant work along with the fences, because goats test the fences everywhere all the time. So you have to like test and check the fences everywhere on a regular basis. Or you have 7 goats in the soybean field next door. That happened once. So that's not ever good on a lot of different fronts. But the only big issue that didn't have so much to do with my pastures is using a cover buck. I trusted a buck that I shouldn't have trusted so much. And he was not able to get my larger does bred. And so now I always use a cover buck. And my first year, I had that giant La Mancha buck I showed early, like in the presentation. He knocked down 2 fences to make some unplanned kids happen with some small does that I didn't really intend on being pregnant anyway. So that's a problem. We put up electric fence just for him, and it was problem solved. And then it's time, the time management, time commitments, constant communication on what I can do with my time. So between Brad and I, my husband and I, we can manage appropriately for pastures, for feeding, for milking times, because you want to milk at the same time every day. And that becomes a communication and time management thing. I've already talked about llamas. So some things that they require that the goats don't is they require being sheared in the spring. They have the same feed and basic mineral needs. You want to check them more often, their eyelids and all of that, because they are more susceptible to parasites. They will be the first ones to tell you you have a parasite problem, likely. They also, for breeding them, they have a very long gestation. It's 350 plus or minus 40 days. So you have an 80-day window to expect babies, which is a problem. And when they do have babies, they don't guard the rest of their herd. They primarily, take care of their baby because they have a baby. So you have to have more than one if you're going to be breeding. And especially the males, but the females too, can become aggressive like a rooster. And a rooster is fine and dandy, but if he's 400 pounds, you don't want to be dealing with that animal. So buying animals that are already good guardians and not human or other animal aggressive is important. Biosecurity practices in general for sheep, for goats, sheep, chickens, all of it. The pasture rotation is so important for the sheep and goats, but it's also really good for the chickens, because the chickens that have access to my top 2 pastures, pasture rotation keeps the bugs up. It keeps the flowers going, things that the chickens like to, eat too. And it keeps all the parasites, including external parasites, down, and all of it. And keeping clean is part of it. I quarantine anything that looks a little questionable, whether it be a chicken or a goat. I have 2 quarantine pens all the time that I'm ready to put goats up, or and I have 2 rabbit hutches basically for quarantining chickens. Anything that looks questionable goes into quarantine. I don't mess with that. Not like, you probably just ate, no, quarantine. And then if it's perfectly fine the next 3 days, look at it, run a fecal, quarantine. minimize exposure from one pen to the next from my chickens. I try to, keep everything clean, the waterers, anything that I'm taking from one house to the next, I try to keep clean. There are times that I dedicate specific shoes to specific houses, and that kind of thing. I always wear dedicated farm shoes. Like my farm shoes don't go off the farm. That's so I don't bring anything back in. And it also, like, people don't want to look at your nasty farm shoes either. So that's also a bonus. I also try to minimize other people coming onto my farm and bringing their things to my farm. And anything that I buy, I quarantine for at least a month, be it a bird, be it a goat, be it a llama. I don't mess with that. As far as keeping chickens and goats, sadly, I didn't have any real good pictures of goats and chickens together. My chickens have access to my top 2 pastures. And this one was from 3 years. This photo is from 3 years ago. I wouldn't leave my goats on this pasture this long. Like this is an overgrazed pasture. I wanted to point out. This was part of my learning curve. But this little guy was chasing this rooster, and this rooster was just running from him, and he thought it was great fun. It's a lot of fun to watch. And you can multi-species rotational graze. A lot of people, the best regenerative grazing is taking a chicken tractor and following behind the goats on the pasture they just rotated, put the chicken tractor on, and then every time you rotate, you can move. And that works for a lot of things. It helps keep the parasites down. It helps regenerate the soil and keep like everything going. And having multiple species like this on one pasture is good for the pasture itself, for its diversity and everything like that. But keeping like sheep and goats, it's species specific on what you want to keep together. So you have to do research on those things. Also, it always helps to have a partner that in crime that likes the same things that you do and has the same goals. And we talk a lot on is the farm actually meeting both of our goals? That's a conversation we have every couple months, and we change our goals accordingly, like getting rid of the Brahmas, like getting rid of the sheep, like keeping specific does in milk for longer, or a number of does in milk at a time. It's really important because I wouldn't be able to do all of this by myself. It's anytime you have multiple species, it's a lot for one person. So that concludes my presentation. You can find us on Facebook at Brookshire Hills Farm. There's my contact information. I am open for questions about anything that I've mentioned.
Excellent. Why am I getting feedback? We definitely appreciate all of the insight that you have provided. I think that there have been a few questions, but we are definitely open to more questions, both for Kat and or if they're poultry questions or ruminant questions for either myself or Dr. Salinas. Anybody who has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I think we can also set it up so that you can unmute yourself if you really need to explain a question.
There is a question from Chris Fearing. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference in sheep and goats about the parasite? Because in fact, sheep also get with problems in parasite. You may be finding that with the famacia, with the cones, and with all the problems that the sheep. I have found that the sheep they eat more closer to the soil, where probably they will find all the eggs, infected larvae in eggs, and the goats they eat in a little bit higher So what is your
So-
experience about that?
So sheep are natural grazers and goats are natural foragers. So over time, sheep have gotten used to having a higher parasite load and tolerate a higher parasite load than goats. They both have their threshold, and once they exceed that, they have a problem. They become anemic, and their eyelids. That's what I'm checking on eyelids is the FAMACHA. If they have a FAMACHA of 3 or 4 or 5, I deem it okay. My ones that are 3, I look so like mid pink. I look again in a few days. A lot of different things can affect that a little bit, but sheep can tolerate more parasites before they become anemic in general, but they do eat much closer to the ground, and they tend to eat grass first. Not always. Sheep will also eat apple trees when there's perfectly fine grass, but they just tolerate a little bit more of that because they're used to eating closer. They're used to eating the things that tend to harbor more larvae and more eggs, well, larvae. And the goats aren't used to that as much. They're used to eating more browse, more forage, more things that are higher, and so their systems aren't made to tolerate nearly as much as the sheep do.
Okay, and also it's very interesting that you're working with the chicken and the different colors of the eggs, the chicks, and also with the goats. So in percentage, what is the time consuming for you? What consumes more of your time, the chicken or the goats?
That is month to month, sometimes day to day. Generally, mid-spring, both are consuming a lot of my time, but it is how many chicks I want to be selling, how many chicks I want to be hatching that really affects, and how much time I want to spend in marketing that really affects how much time I put into chickens. Goats take more time when we have babies, which I usually plan for March or April, which is also the same time that I'm making the big push for chickens. So I would say the summer, it's much more chickens. I am putting more effort to make sure I'm gathering eggs a couple times a day, to make sure that I am doing the best I can to increase egg production, and keeping them separate. Where in the winter, my goats are more of my time commitment because I'm still milking 1, if not 2, most of the winter. And I have less places to feed and water chickens because I consolidate my chicken houses in the winter. The fall is when I get to make soap the most, the late summer and fall, because it's how much I want to market either of them and how much milk I want to be using. And it's really about how much time I want to put in either of them in the fall.
Okay, now from the standpoint of the profit and the money that you get, how much do you get in percentage from chicken and from goats?
That has changed year to year. Until last year, I would say I made a little bit more on chickens, but my goats more than paid for themselves. This year, just because the way I manage chickens, and just the nature of all of it, my chickens probably brought in 80% of what I brought in from the farm. But I also have to factor in, I also don't ever have to buy cheese, milk, eggs, yogurt. And in that way, my goats are more personally, like personal consumption. They also both provide me with meat. This year, the chickens actually probably provided as much, if not more meat than the goat that we processed. But this year it's been the chickens, and that was because I made a big push for the chickens and I had the time. So goats, it takes time to build up your herd, and all of that takes the time, and then you're pretty stable unless you sell off a bunch all at once or buy a bunch, which is, you know, all those resources. Where chickens, you can fluctuate very quickly, and you can, you know, market more eggs, you can hatch more eggs, you can hatch less eggs depending, and it's you know, within 3 or 4 weeks, almost immediate, where goats is more of a year, months to years. So it's hard. It's not really like comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, for sure. And so anytime do you have like a selling of craft milk from some other people?
Was the question if I sell raw milk to other people?
Yeah, right.
So occasionally someone will call me up and or message me and say, I've got piglets, calves, puppies, kittens that lost their mother, whatever. And I've sold milk for those things. I have a neighbor that raises bottle calves that sometimes on some of the really fragile ones, she's like, Kat, do you have 3 gallons of milk? And for things like that, I will. But for consumption, I don't. I don't touch that.
What is the reason?
All of the red tape and the legality and just I see it as more of a hazard and liability than it would be worth.
Okay, yeah, because here in Missouri is allowed to sell at your farm and the hands of the customer any raw milk without any problem. And even for some other farm that has like a processing, they process for cheese with the label that they have a license to be selling cheese. They may be buying, for example, if they make Class B milk for cheese, they may be receiving milk from any other farms, but also that they have that kind of class. So if they certify for Class B milk, they may be selling to other farms that they are just selling that kind of milk in processing for cheese or yogurt, still like that. So because I bring this because some dairy goats farmers, they have the problem that sometimes they don't know what to do with the milk, with the excess of milk. So I think it's interesting question of the marketing, and I think you spend a lot of time just looking for markets. So I think that is very good experience, how to be looking for markets and how to match the market with your production, because sometimes if the market is too big, how are you going to supply for that market? So it's very interesting, that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've really made my goals around the markets. And it was nice. I started making goat milk soap because I had excess, and I had some, like, if it doesn't filter beautifully, I use it for something that's not consumption, like not, you know, eating, not drinking. And so that's where that was my biggest push. Like, I'd filter it and then use it in soap, and it's been also been a lot of fun. I did one year raise a bottle calf on it, and that was a really good way to make money on the milk, but it was also a lot of work, and I cannot stand cattle. They are slobbery. I can't do it.
So if you were talking to somebody who didn't have a farm yet, but was interested in getting into chickens or goats or another species, what would you recommend to them to start with?
For goats especially, Story's Guide to Raising Dairy Goats was worth its weight in gold. Reading that cover to cover, I am so glad I did that before starting. It obviously didn't keep me from all of the problems I could have had, but it gave me a place to go back and look, like to reference. And I joined several Facebook pages for goats and poultry that also, like, you can see on groups like that, you can see patterns of other people having similar problems. Even if you're never posting or asking questions, just watching the patterns is really interesting. And I went to a lot of seminars. I went to pasture seminars. I went to FAMACHA seminars. I haven't really gone to many seminars on poultry. I don't know if they exist or not, but I am on a lot of poultry groups. So chickens, I've heard referred to as the gateway drug to farming. So they're a lot easier typically, and they're just, easier. As far as getting started, make sure that you do your research on how much property you need for how many animals you're getting, how much space a chicken house needs to be for the number of chickens you have in it. Your fences are actually appropriate for not just your species, but your topography, and what shelters you need for winter versus summer. Make sure that you're starting with those things before or as you are looking for your first stock, and make sure when you buy your first stock that it's healthy and that it meets your goals. Are your goals dairy? Are your goals like just brush? Are your goals to have really economical babies? On what do you want to start out with? Really expensive animals and then breed and sell really expensive animals, or do you want to start out with cheaper animals and try to add your value to them? Where's your market? That's identifying what market you have before starting with an animal is really important too.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a very good advice. The identification of what you need before and the market before. Marketing product after you have it, especially when it's perishable, is a concern.
Or if it's eating money too.
Yes, if it's a live animal.
Yep.
Yeah, so I will say that we do have, there are workshops that Lincoln University does offer for both poultry and for various small ruminant aspects. And those are not always advertised super well, but we're working on trying to improve advertising of those things. And the more people who reach out with questions, people are always able to reach out with questions to either any of us that
Yes, in fact, we are planning to have our small ruminant field day for November 2nd here at Carver Farm at Lincoln University. So we are going to invite you through the emails when you register. And also we have a small ruminant webinar series that we are inviting different people to be talking during the year. We have a webinar once or twice a month. And so we are going to be sharing the YouTube channel and the Facebook page that we have all the videos in the last 2 years. We have around 20 videos of different speakers. So, and we are going to upload this one of Kat also, of course. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, pretty good. Thank you.
Thank you guys for inviting me, and thank everybody for listening, I guess.
Yes, we appreciate everyone who has logged on to watch, and we will hope that they will come back for our next session on October 12th, I believe, where we'll be talking about aquaculture, and the 19th we'll be talking about native plants. And Andrew can end the live stream. You need to log off to end the live stream.
Oh, okay. I can end it.
I don't. Can you just end it, or do we need to log off? What do we need to do?
Any other
End the whole thing.
any other question from the people
I see.
that is
Yeah.
connected
Before-
already? Or-
Any further questions? And I think we're mostly just getting thank yous in the comments at this point.
Yeah.